Today on the show, I have the pleasure of speaking with David Dawkins. Now, David is the founder and owner of Seven Bridges Realty Group, a multifamily real estate firm based in Jacksonville, Florida. His firm is focused on small to medium-sized multifamily properties, offering both brokerage services and property management assistance. David is passionate about helping others learn the benefits of mastering personal finances in order to take control of one's life, and he has done just that in the last 5 years. I'm pretty pumped and excited to have him on the show today to share his incredible knowledge. G'day, David. Welcome to the show. How you doing today, mate?
Hey, good, Reed. Thank you for having me.
Mate, my pleasure. Now, before we're talking in the green room, I actually forgot to mention, you guys have a podcast, right? Can you just give us a little, I forgot to even mention in the introduction, what's the podcast called?
The podcast is The Professional Investor. You can just search Professional Investor on most podcast platforms. It'll pop up. We obviously would certainly enjoy anyone going over there to check that out as well. We had you on, not too long ago. It was the first time we got to speak. So, it's a similar, interview show. We cover other real estate topics as well, but certainly, be glad for anyone to check that out.
Awesome. Well, that being said, mate, let's dive into it. The first question I ask all my guests when they jump on the show is rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
The first dollar was probably, it was just from mowing lawns, work, doing some work for friends and family. But then I really, which kind of led to kind of the third dollar, because then the second dollar was going to work for a car wash. I remember I worked for a car wash when I was in high school, and it was fine. Like I had a couple of buddies that worked there, and they we got to drive. Granted, it was 10 feet at a time, but we did get to drive a bunch of cars, which when you're 16, seems like a good idea. So that was the first real job where I actually had to show up on time or for a certain time, got a paycheck, et cetera. But then I realized at the time, because back then, at least here in Florida, the minimum wage was $4.85. Wow. I remember it crossed $5 when, after I'd been there for a month or so, and we were all like, oh, this is sweet. This is awesome. But I started doing some quick math, and I was just like, man, I could make more. And I had been doing pressure washing and some painting and stuff on the side as well. So I actually went to work for my buddy's brother. Had a painting company. I did that for a little bit, but then realized I could start my own. I was like, well, wait a second. He's paying me $7 an hour. That's why I left the car wash to go work for him. But then I was like, I can drum up enough business, in charge, say, roughly $15 an hour, and I would still be cheaper than all the other, painting and pressure washing companies. So that was, those are, I guess my first few dollars, but that's just kind of how I got started, into the, business world, I guess you could say, even though it was on a much smaller scale. And that too, it was a lot different at that point in my life. I didn't know any real entrepreneurs. I didn't know anyone who owned a, in a real business, in Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrants. Most everyone's familiar with Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he talks about that, employee, small business, big business investor. And I didn't know anybody who owned a big business, a business that was a true process. Right. Everyone I knew of was a small business owner. I had a couple of friends that same thing. My buddy's brother owned a painting company. My friend's dad owned a landscaping company. And that's kind of where we, where we learned how to work. But then, and at that time, that's what I thought business was. Okay, if you're a business owner, I thought that's what it was. Mm-hmm. You were just the one driving the truck and you had a couple other guys in the back. You weren't always working as much. And then, obviously things have changed a lot since then, but that's, because of that experience, I learned, at that point, I was like, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life. I'm not going to be out here pressure washing, painting houses in the summer in Florida, for $15 an hour even, which at the time was good money. I just knew, I was like, this isn't the end goal, and where can I go from here? And so that's where, I didn't know. All I knew was, you were told go to college. I was like, okay, so I'm just going to do this, make some money, and then I'll go to college, which I did. And I continued to work through college as well. But it was all for, to get the people, what I deemed as successful was the white collar, professional jobs that you saw, around town, just drove nicer cars. And they just seemed everyone seemed happy. They say, I just assume they're all happy, making good money. And then, so I just was told, like, go that route. It's a route I went to college, got a degree. And then, but then once I got into that world, I realized, like, okay, well, this isn't that great either. And then, we can kind of go from there. I'm kind of taking it on beyond that first dollar, but that's when everything started shifting, throughout. That's what actually recently a guy told me. It was actually a guy I bought a property off of, and we were talking. He's like 30 years, ahead of me. He's wrapping things up, but he goes, I told him, I was kind of telling my story a little bit, and he's like, yeah, you figure it out in your 20s, you make your move in your 30s, you make your money in your 40s, and then you start relaxing. I was like, oh, and it was just funny because that's kind of what I would say, similar to me. Like, I started working as a teenager, but then I just kind of kept working and figured everything out more in my 20s. And then as I, it was right around when I was turning 30, I was like, all right, that's, things started to click, and I was like, all right, I need to make a move and do my own thing where I can still achieve my financial goals, but have more control of my life.
Right. And I think, so I completely agree with all the sentiments you just said, but I want to just quickly touch on the fact that you said you didn't know anyone who had big businesses, but the fact is every business, when you boil it down to, is either a trade of services, which what you were doing, which was painting and power washing. But it really, I always loved, because I grew up as well on the tools, as I like to say, working on the tools in the Australian summer. So probably very similar to Florida in the sweltering heat. But that, I still remember to this day telling my dad, call my boss, tell him I've broken my leg or something. I can't go back to work. I was building pools in the Australian summer, but it was just, it really valued two things. One, education, like, you go to school because I didn't want to do manual labor for the rest of my life at $15 an hour, which I think is what essentially you opened your eyes to pretty quickly. Yeah. But two, also valuing that dollar and not being afraid to roll up the sleeves and get it done yourself, because so many people, and I'm not saying kids these days, but so many people don't have that experience of coming through the tools, knowing how to graft, knowing how to get your fingers dirty and just getting it done. You know what I mean? And that's such a powerful lesson to learn as a young age in order to value that dollar, to then go and apply those knowledge and experience and those hard hours working in the sun to something that, don't work harder, work smarter. And I think that's what you've ultimately discovered. So with when leaving college, how'd you go down the real estate path? Like, when was that along this journey of growth?
Yeah, funny. That was still a few years later, because again, I'm thinking, hey, I got this 4-year degree, like, we're good, right? Don't we you graduate, you start making 6 figures, like, that's good. And then obviously, as most people know, I mean, depending on your degree, of course, but typically that 4-year degree, you're not coming out making 6 figures. So, right. So that I basically, I was even telling my wife, we were talking about this. So I moved over to Jacksonville. I was from Tallahassee, and then to me, like, it was, Jacksonville's a smaller market in the grand scheme. You're in LA, and even I know you invest in Austin, these other, but still, to me, it was a big city. And I was like, right. Oh man, I'm graduating, I'm moving to the big city. It's kind of, like you're an adult now. You're really right. Yes, you've been over 18 for a while, but you're actually an adult. You're leaving college. So, right. But I get over there, and I remember I was making, that first job, it was $36,000. I mean, that's where, again, I graduated in 2008 too, which I didn't even realize how bad of a time that was to be graduating, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I moved over here. I was living by myself and making 36 grand. I'm like, okay, this really isn't great. Like, this isn't all it's cracked up to be. And I left that job, took a couple other jobs, and then I finally realized, and again, you learn this all through experience. Like, but I was like, okay, there is no shortcut. So let me just find a company, again, because I still didn't know anyone, entrepreneurial, or anybody that had gone off on their own like that. So I'm looking at it and still thinking, all right, I got to go down the corporate route. Let me just find another company that's got a little more mobility. And so that's what I did. And pretty much one thing led to another. I received a few promotions. Actually got promoted out to Dallas, and then it was a coincidence that I got promoted back to Jacksonville, and was doing really well. I was with them for almost 10 years, and I got to a position, I was essentially a regional executive and the youngest of my position in the company. So I was, quote unquote, on that fast track. But the problem was, there was a number of problems. I realized, and then at this point though, which that's where I think it's important kind of what you talk about, like too, for people not wanting to get their hands dirty in say manual labor work, more in like real estate and kind of the industry we're in. But even in the corporate world, everyone just wants to take the shortcut. And unfortunately, sometimes you just gotta build it up. And that's what it did. And so but each year I kept I had, good annual reviews and percentage increases and kept getting promotions, and finally got to, like I said, that executive level where I was paid off the bottom line. And from really there, which that's what everyone, needs to understand too. Like you want to have a position, especially if you're going to try to, invest. Obviously you need money. So you need to, even unless you do have a certificate, like you're a doctor or, engineer, architect, something in those lines where you have a certification. All the other jobs, you're going to just have to work your way up, and you need to get into something that's either in sales, this is my opinion, in sales, or that you can get paid off of the bottom. You're in some sort of managerial role where you get paid off the bottom line. So then your income can, increase at a much greater clip than that, say 2 or 3%, annual increase. And so that's what I did. And so I was like, I was just on the prize. It was all about, everybody, I think their initial goal is make 6 figures. You want to get to that number. And then I was in that position and then once I got to that level, it was only a couple of years. We performed really well. At the time I was there, we increased the profits by 150%. And so
wow.
And it was, and obviously it wasn't just me too. It was a lot of other people, but it's still, but my pay, basically went with that essentially. And so I was making the money, and that's when so I'm like, okay, I'm essentially here. Like everything at this point, I'm 28. I've been with the company, 5 or 6 years. I was roughly like late 20s. And I'm like, okay, everything that I've had my eye on the last 5 years, like I'm here and I got it. But I'm like, why am I not happy? I was like, why do I not enjoy going to work? And it was just one of those. And then I look back, there were times that I probably, if I wasn't so dead set on just making more money, probably would have realized some stuff earlier. But basically I just kind of assumed the guys that were in the position that I was trying to get to, I just assumed everything was good. Like they're happy, they enjoyed working. And in reality, you get there and they all make good money, but they all are not happy at their job, and there's a lot of factors that they don't like. And that's what I kind of learned everything. And I'm like, okay. And then because I was younger, I'm like, okay, I'm not even 30. So am I going to do this for the next 30 years, like 20 or 30 years? I was like, and I was at a position, they also wanted me to keep moving. And so basically my role wouldn't have really changed. I was at because I didn't have any desire to be at their corporate office. But I was just going to go from one market to the next. So basically go from my position in Jacksonville to an Atlanta, to an Austin, to a LA. And I could, as we performed, I was going to make more money, but to really make more money, that's what I was going to have to do.
Right.
And I realized and there was a lot of day to day, they were slowly taking the autonomy of the regional offices. Like they were moving, centralizing more corporate office. And that's just, to me, I wanted more control, especially like, if you're paying me off the bottom line, you want me to act like a business owner, then you need to allow me to act like a business owner. And there was some issues with that. And then the fact my wife, at the time too, she's from Florida, didn't want to move again. And basically I realized like, okay, I can keep making more money, but I don't see myself really being happy going down this road. And so what can I do to basically achieve both? How can I achieve the financial success and then live life, more on my terms? And so I started looking at everything, and it took me a while. I swear I've researched every franchise out there. I've been on, I think most of y'all, if you're familiar with Biz Buy Sell, the website where you can buy businesses, I've looked, if it's been on the market I stopped it, a few years ago, but there was a stretch there where, I was calling business brokers. I was looking at buying a business or just leaving, starting my own. And everything that I kept coming back to was, and I started to learn about real estate investing, but it was like, okay, well, I need some income today. And so, but everything I kept coming back to, it's like, basically this is still a job. Like you're running a business. It's labor intensive. You're very involved with the day to day, like everything I was looking into. And so I finally realized like, okay, well, real estate seems, and at this point I had, I kind of skipped over, but too, I was really into personal finance. That was huge for me. And I paid off all my student loan debt, got my credit score was high. And so it was easier for me to lend, I was very lendable. It was easier for me to borrow. And that's kind of how I had high income, no debt. It was easy for me to start getting into real estate from that perspective, those first few properties. And then I kind of realized that, hey, I'm going to have to, at some point I need to leave, but right now I'm not going to be able to replace this income that I have today. So I basically made the decision to I was going to ride it out. I probably knew before I left my job, I knew I was going to leave probably 2 to 3 years before that. And then I basically was setting myself up, as far as like stacking cash away, continuing to be, live within my means. And basically as my income kept moving up, I just, had that cushion, that delta just continued to grow, and I had more money to invest. And that's when, I just started getting one rental property after another. And then, it was a little over a year ago now, that I just, pulled the plug, left my job entirely, went full time into real estate. And I had a decent portfolio at that point too. And then I knew with all of and that's, kind of another topic we talk, but as far as, being a pure investor or running a business in real estate.
Right.
That's where I started realizing that most of the people, like, yes, they invest in real estate, but a lot of people that you hear on different podcasts or anything, et cetera, like they're also running businesses in real estate. And so that's basically where I decided, I kind of started realizing that. And I'm like, well, wait a second, why am I going to go start a business in some other industry, even if it can make money? Because it's going to take a bunch of my time just to make money and then invest it in real estate. And so I was like, let me just stick 100% in real estate. And then over the past year, it's actually, the business side has continued to grow even more so than I originally planned. Originally, it was going to be more just essentially, almost running deals from a JV standpoint and possibly some syndication. But usually, most of our deals are the smaller ones versus JVs. But there's been some other businesses that have kind of spun off of the original vision, over a year ago.
Yeah, look, mate, awesome content just there in terms of, everything that you've spilled out to us and the audience. But I think what you're really getting at, if I can pick it apart, is that the fact that you realize real estate, yes, does produce cash flow, but it's a little bit more slow and steady wins the race. And building businesses that complement the real estate portfolio means that you could have revenue coming in from those businesses that support the ultimate goal of continuing to grow the portfolio. And that in itself means it's a business ecosystem, because one business supports the other, it supports the investments. And that is in my mind, the most powerful way to build wealth. And you look at all the different businesses out there, look at Apple and how they started with a computer, and now all the different widgets they have, the iPod, the iPhone, the tablet, and it's all around the Apple brand, right? And it's the same thing with what you're doing. With your real estate business, you've got the brokerage services, you've got the property management game, you've got the actual investing, and one supports the other, and one can't be successful without the other. And I think that's the most powerful thing that I've talked to so many entrepreneurs on this show, that they come to that realization that yes, they want to be a real estate investor, but they need to have the continual revenue coming through. And real estate will produce some of that, but you can also maximize that revenue by bringing property management in-house, by doing brokerage services yourself, and keeping the profits for yourself rather than paying it to someone else. And for me, that was the biggest thing that took when the blinkers came off. I was like, oh, I get it now. You can do so much more with it than just owning the real estate.
that same with me. That's so true. And that's what I've learned. Like, I'm actually reading, there's been a few books, but the one I'm reading now is on Rockefeller. But if you study a lot of the great, business leaders in the past, I mean, that's what they did. He wanted to control every aspect of the oil industry. There was another book I read. It's a good book called The Fish That Ate the Whale, about a guy that took over the banana industry. It's kind of random, but it's actually a very interesting story. But same thing. I mean, they controlled from growing the crops in Central America all the way to selling it on the street, here in the US. So again, that vertical integration. And that's kind of to your point, it kind of did, the light bulb went off at some point over the last year. And it really started organically, because I was like, okay, I had, some money coming in off the portfolio, like I said. So I kind of, and I had a large cash reserve. I kind of took that leap of faith. I was like, hey, if I can pick up these doors, I got basically my runway is X long. So if I can get this many doors in this time, like I'll be good. And so that was my strategy. And then, but as I did, when I started moving up from the single family to small multifamilies into the commercial, still small multifamilies, but commercial, 5 and up, like my first property was a 10 unit. And it was, I was amazed at how like the property management, because I was using at the time was outsourced property management for some of our properties, and they were doing fine on the single families, but for some, they just didn't understand how to operate a 10 unit, which isn't that big of a gap, but it was just tough. And then I realized there was no one in town that really special. You had a few companies that handled the 100 plus, that model. And then you had a bunch of companies doing single families. So it was almost out of necessity because I had another property under contract. And I'm like, man, if I bring on, and at this point I'm starting to get partners. So I'm like, man, if I got some money now, I'm finding the deals, but if they don't start operating, this is going to be a real short run I got here in real estate. And so it was basically out of necessity that I started the property management just for my own properties, and then realized, if I have everything set up, that's not the main focus, but we will take on other owners' properties as well. And then to do that, you have to be a broker, here, at least in Florida, you have to manage anyone else's property. You have to be a broker. So, and I was already an agent. I've been an agent for a few years. So I'm like, well, I guess I'll get my broker's license. And then kind of, again, back to just like, okay. And then the light bulbs start going off. I'm like, well, wait a second. Cause there's a lot of, like, for example, here, there's still a lot of, say, like triplex and quadplexes that'll come across my desk. But to me, one, I'm not interested in them anymore. And two, the numbers just don't work. Like here, there's people that are either doing house hacking or they're Airbnb. And so I know in my mind, I'm like, yes, I know that's going to sell for, call it $500,000, but I wouldn't pay more than $350. So, and where instead of just letting those go across my desk now, and as you build up a network of other investors and brokers here in Jacksonville, it's like, okay, now I can help you. I can find a buyer for you. Like I'm not interested, but I know someone. So it had just all kind of organically happened. And now we even offer cost segregation, services as well. So just again, it's just like, and that was just something I was doing those on all my properties. And then, contacted the company, worked with them. And I was like, hey, so I'm a sales associate for them as well. But it just helps. Again, it's kind of that full service. And if it's like, yes, there's a number of things going on, but they're all focused around small to mid-sized multifamily, in Jacksonville. Right. And so it's basically, like you said, it's kind of a little ecosystem I was trying to create.
And you are creating it, right? It's everything from cost segregation. I guess the question is, at what point do you stop controlling every piece of it because you just don't have so many hours in the day, right? There's some things that you can leave the profits on the table. Like I'm thinking of, you don't need to be picking up the paintbrush, or even to the cost segregation. You don't need to be actually doing the walk around the property, right? Or doing the crunching the numbers, but maybe you have someone in-house who can do it. So talk to me about how that team has expanded so you're not personally doing it. Maybe you haven't got to that stage yet, but you know that's where you're going.
Absolutely. And I'm kind of in that, beginning of that stage. We're starting to, outsource and hire on. You have one employee now. And then basically, I think the key for that question, what I did was I knew, what I wanted the business to look like in 5 years. And I heard once someone said, I can't remember where this was, but basically any business you start it and run it like you're planning to sell it in 5 years. And whether you do or not, that doesn't matter. But but when you have that mindset, it forces you to create systems and processes to where, you're not doing everything. You can plug people in. And I even actually behind me here on the wall, I have an organizational chart. And so I created it, I don't know, how long ago, but I put in all the positions for under each, just any sort of basic, sales, operations, finance, like any company. And I plugged in all these, quote unquote, different departments in my company, even though when I typed it out, like literally under each position, the name was David. Like I did everything, but I knew, and then I had a list of like, okay, well, when I get to this many doors, I'll fill this role. When I get to here, I'll fill that role. And so, but to kind of answer your question of what I've done so far, first off, I think this is what's great nowadays. Just with technology, so much is great with technology, but you can automate, so it's something else. I always forget where I hear this stuff too. I wish I could give people more credit for their quotes, but someone said, everyone hears delegate, right? Everyone's like, well, you need to delegate stuff. But I heard someone said, they're like, no, you first eliminate, then automate, then delegate.
Yep.
And that's the, kind of the way I started looking at everything. So first off, just because when you start, you're always like, oh, this is a new process. Let me create a checklist for this. But then you realize like, this is so random. Like now I created this checklist that's in this folder that no one ever uses. Right. So, simplify your business just as much as possible. And then, automate it and utilize as much technology as you can out there. And one, like for an example of that is just with property management, if you invest in a quality property management software, and I use Buildium, I don't get any perk for that, but just to let everybody know. I know AppFolio is one out, the big one everyone uses, Yardi. There's a few others that are great, but basically that will handle a lot of it for you. I mean, the software and the functions that they provide will, just like communications back and forth to tenants. It's so easy to just automate, send a mass email to 100, like through the system. Everything is housed there as well. I actually just went through that with my employee. She was just keeping like every email. When I logged into the property manager email, I'm like, one day I just went on a deleting spree and just cleaned it all up because there was duplicates everywhere. I was like, we don't need all of this. But then we utilize Tenant Turner too, which is another company that helps on the lead, for vacant units. So I'm trying to think if there's any other companies like that we've outsourced, but basically I would, just recommend use as many functions like that as possible. And then, just bring people on. And it's funny, she started out just originally for marketing, because when I started the podcast like a year ago, this was all new to me. Like my background is more finance and sales, and I didn't have anything, when it came to marketing. And then she just, as we grew, like kind of organically was willing to take on, she needed a part-time, was open to this part-time job, but then the way she wanted to leave this other one. So she was like, okay, I'll take on more work. So it kind of organically happened to where she now handles the day-to-day from the property management standpoint, as far as, fielding the calls. I'm still very involved. The way I do it, and it took a little while, and I don't plan to do this forever, but where I actually do run property management one day a week. So like one day a week, I actually am operating that inbox and the phone and, if anything comes up. And the reason why because it just keeps me dialed in on everything. And then really when I made that shift, the change from like, it didn't really even take up that much more of my time, because it eliminated all this communication that we were having on a daily basis. Right. I was basically like, hey, I'll handle that Wednesday. Everything just turned into, I'll handle it Wednesday. I'll get to it, assuming it wasn't urgent. So that's kind of how I've gone about it. And then the plan is moving forward, and then everything we outsource, you mentioned like, picking up the hammer and all, like we outsource that to all our contractors. And that's just a network of vendors that I've, created over the years, just from the different times that I needed them. And the next step with that, though, again, kind of like a light bulb went off to me too. I'm like, well, this is easy, because all I got to do at the end of the year is, once that I realize that I've paid certain vendors, so once you realize you paid a handyman service $50,000, well, then you can just go hire your own handyman. Right. And that's kind of the route that basically where we're at now is just as the units grow, it's basically just, as the expenses grow, start bringing that stuff in house, so we can then control, the expenses that much better.
And I think the beauty of doing that is, to your point, you've got to the end of the year, financial year, you can see how much you've spent on certain vendors. And I know for ourselves at Wildhorn, we spend a lot of money on accounting and bookkeeping. And there comes a point, it's like, when do I need to hire a CFO? Like, when do I bring that in-house? And that gives give them a title, because I'm spending, maybe it's $10,000 a month across the 2,000 units to manage this. So there does come a point, and we've had conversations about that, but it's only once you've got to a certain stage. And it feels good once you come to that stage, because you then know, well, I can save a bit of money, but also can bring it in-house and they work directly for me, right? And that's something that it feels pretty good when you're building something from nothing and you're building a little baby. But I guess does 2020 look like for you going forward? And I guess the other question is, key performance indicators? Do you know if you bring on X amount of units from a property management service point of view that you're going to earn Y amount of dollars in terms of revenue, so you can continue to be profitable and pay those employees and keep growing the staff and keep growing the business on that end?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, well, first of all, I'll just answer that part, first. That's a good thing about, or one of the good things, and there's other industries like this too, but with property management, really your personnel is your main, expense. And so like right now, basically it's slightly variable. I was going to say most of your other expenses, are variable, which that's the thing. Like once you get it off the ground, once you pay for, the software subscription, tenant turner, you're paying X a month, you're, marketing. Once you have all these initial expenses, that are essentially are fixed. Like I know building them will, as you increase your units, it starts going up marginally, but it's basically every dollar of revenue doesn't increase, the dollar of expenses on most of them, with the exception of personnel. And so that's another, the way I look, because obviously individuals, which again, though, if you take a number of things off their plate, as much as possible, being like having tenant turner, for example, help with leasing the units and fielding a lot of that as inbound communication, then that one person that maybe historically could handle 50 units can now handle 75 or more because you have taken so much off their plate. And so basically then you're looking at it and that's why I run everything off of percentages though too. So if that personnel expense, obviously, really, and it kind of goes up, it doesn't vary, but it pretty much in that 35 to 50% of revenue is really going to end up going to personnel. Right. And that doesn't even include, my time. But then the good thing is the overhead, though, is going to be a very small over time as you continue to grow. Will be a smaller and smaller percentage. And so, as far as making sure you're profitable still, basically, you know that every dollar coming in, essentially, quote, roughly, I don't want to, it varies, but basically half of that, is going to be, close to half of that is going to be more to your profit and that's why even that too, again, because the, quote unquote profit, but as I said, like I'm not accounting in my time too. So if you broke it down to your owner wage, then the actual profit, dividends at the bottom would be much less than that. But from your expenses, they're pretty minimal. You have your personnel, then you have your overhead expenses. Like I said, as you grow, become smaller and smaller. So
the question I have for you is, what's been the biggest lesson learned through this whole process? And you now start to figure it out. You're starting to crawl, and now you're probably walking. Sooner rather than later, you'll probably be running and even sprinting. So what's been the biggest lesson out of all of this?
I would say that, kind of goes back to what you mentioned earlier, but just don't be you can't be afraid to roll your hands up and just do things yourself. That's one thing I've learned is just that most of this stuff, because again, for me, I'm not really technologically, I'm in my I'm 34. So it's like, yes, I understand technology. I'm not that old, but I would not, even today, for example, it's amazing, again, back to technology, what's out there. I was updating my podcast website, on the back end, with the WordPress site, which I know some people are probably like, well, yeah, what's the big deal? But I'm telling you, that was foreign. When I logged into it, they built it, they gave me the information. And then I was just like, man, but all I did was Google. I Googled a couple YouTube videos and made the few adjustments I needed. I didn't even have to contact the developer again. And so that's what, over this past year, I think I've learned my confidence in myself has just continued to grow. And basically that you'll figure it out. Again, depending on the industry you're going into, but most of the listeners are it's probably real estate related, or just, business on, again, not too high level where it's pretty easy. And at the end of the day, actually I should tell you, it's simple, but it's not easy. It really, and it's tough to do, but it's not that complicated. So if you sit down and actually focus, you can figure a lot of things out. Right. And that's where, and it's just all like property management, for example, it's just a lot of work. And that's what real estate, I feel like in general, it's a lot of work up front, at least for the buy and hold investors like myself. You put a ton of work in up front, but once you get everything set up, it's not passive. You do have to manage it, but it starts to become much more smoother. And it's the same thing. I would say the same thing has happened on the business side. Just everything. It's a lot of work getting stuff set up. I mean, you got to create LLCs and open the bank accounts and just et cetera, et cetera. It just seems like all this monotonous stuff. But once you get through that, then like, okay, now you can get back to the fun part of just getting the business going.
Building businesses, yeah.
So I would just say, I mean, just the fact that stuff's not that complicated. It's more what I learned.
It is not complicated. It's not rocket science, and it's something that. But you, again, to the point of what we think the underlying theme for the show is like learning to roll up the sleeves and just be willing to figure it out. Because what you said earlier, even in your corporate world, people are still just trying to take the shortcut. And it's you got to stop that BS and that bullshit, and just roll up the sleeves. And it's not hard. It just takes some time, focus, turn the bloody phone off, and go use YouTube if you need to do everything from tiling a floor to updating your WordPress site, to starting a podcast. Like, all those things help. And I think that's the beauty of building business, is that you're continuing to learn things. Because I can't remember, you talked about quotes before. Like, someone said to me the other day, like, I just know that I know very little, and I've got still so much more to learn, right? And that's what business is. You're just constantly learning about new ways to do it better, to do it more efficiently, to build teams. All that stuff is it's learning. You're just coming from one lesson to the other, and you're stocking it away in the back of the mind, and then you keep building forward, and then look to build other businesses, other things within the ecosystem that can help propel you towards your goals. So awesome stuff.
Yeah, that's one thing. I mean, I've noticed most successful people, it's a common theme, is they're lifelong learners.
Right. And
they just always are. And that was the thing too. That was a big mindset shift. And I don't know when that kind of started, probably, kind of the start of all this real estate stuff. But yeah, when I left college, I was one like, all right, I'm never done.
Right.
Not going back. And then I ended up, of course, going back and getting my MBA because, again, it just furthered me in my corporate career at the time. But yeah, but now, I enjoy it, learning. I'm always reading books, listening to podcasts, and that's something, too, you mentioned, or one, I think two people, one, I will say it's a lot more enjoyable. It's a lot easier to roll your hands up and get dirty when it's your business, as opposed to someone else. It's your baby. Yes. You're like, hey, I don't care if I got to do it. It's getting done. This is my name. It's representing, like, we're getting this thing going. And so yeah, I think that's just something that makes it easier once you do,
awesome.
Once you do jump out on your own.
Awesome. Well, mate, we're coming to the end of the show, but before we dive into the top 5 investing tips, one last question for you. What does 2020 have in store for you and beyond?
Hopefully this other property does, continue to stay on track and close by the end of the month, which would be one of the, the biggest for us, as far as me and my personal portfolio. So that'll be huge, and just looking to continue to grow everything like we've kind of touched on. All this is everything we're mentioning is really like, I like how you put it, it's like you're crawling and walking. That's where I would say I'm at, going from that like crawl to walk stage. So I'm just excited about everything that I've been able to start and like lay the foundation for, over the last 12 months to now just continue to build on.
Love it. All right, mate. Well, look, let's get into the top 5 investing tips. Ready to do it?
Let's do it.
Mate, what's the daily habit you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
So, man, I'm big on habits and processes. So, but I have my morning routine, but I would say the biggest thing that I do is at the end of each day, I map out my next day. And so when I wake up, there's no thinking. I'm not like I have to wake up every once. Oh, what do I got to do today? I have my morning routine. I go, I work out, get ready, I'll read. And then, I do a couple of little journaling things, and then basically come into my office, and it's just right there on my desk of what I got to do. And then just throughout the day, cross everything off. If something doesn't get done, it just obviously gets added to the next day. So then you make sure everything gets done. And I feel like it's really at the end of the day, I'm not worrying. I'm not at 8:00 at night. I'm not sitting there going, oh man, did I forget something? Because I've kind of wrapped up my end of the day. So. Right. Love it.
Question number 2 is, who's been the most influential person in your career to date?
I haven't, that's what, I don't think I can even mention, one specific person. And I like to actually point this out because, and especially in real estate, you hear so much about mentors and how important it is to have a mentor. And that's so true. I would agree with that. There's a lot of benefits, but you don't have to have one particular person. And that's where, 10 years ago, I didn't know about podcasts, but I would consider all of the, someone like yourself, the people that you listen to on these podcasts and the authors of these books that I've read, I would say they're all, it'd be hard to pick one, but those are the most influential people. You don't have to have someone in your immediate circle who's a successful real estate investor. And you don't have to go, if you find one, you don't have to bug the guy to death either. You can obviously try to create relationships where you can, but so many people, like yourself, are putting out content that you can pick up on. It's free. It's out there. Like, just go get it. And then, you can have all the mentors in the world if you just, go take in everything they're putting out.
I love it. No, it's so true. And there is so much, ignorance isn't an excuse anymore. Everything's at our fingertips and we can go get the information we need. So yeah, definitely love it. Question number 3, what is the most influential tool in your business? And when I say tool, it could be a physical tool like a journal or a phone, or it could be a piece of software that you use on a daily basis. What is the most influential tool?
Yeah, I would say, now at this point, it'd have to be the property management software. That's just, again, not that you have to use, building, you can use whichever one, but if you don't have some sort of tool like that, then it would just be really tough it'd be really tough to scale beyond a few units, and really keep track of everything.
100%.
So.
No, I think, having software is so important, particularly in a business like property management.
Yeah.
Question number 4, in one sentence, what's been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
I'm trying to think the biggest failures, because everyone's had quite a few, but that's where I would say the biggest one. It's funny. It was really that experience of because I've had a lot of other issues. I bought houses that then it still had knob and tube wiring and both ACs went out like in the first 2 months. So I've had those experiences, but I think the experience of the property management, and knowing like, hey, that didn't work. This failed. Like, so then I had to find a solution on my own, which ended up being me create my own, company. But yeah, I would say that was the biggest failure was, put outsourcing property management onto a certain company that, wasn't able to handle it. So then, what I learned from that was, hey, sometimes you just got to do it yourself, Right. But I think, and then I will just to add on that too, because people always, and kind of goes back to our conversation, because if you do everything yourself, it can hurt you from the scaling perspective. It's hard to keep scaling if you're doing everything. So right. when you can bring stuff in house, that like, we talked about like where you then hire it out. It's like, yes, it's your company, you control it. But even if you can do stuff in the beginning on your own, but have a plan to hire someone to handle that on a day-to-day.
Love it. Love it, mate. Mate, final question. Where can people reach you to continue the conversation? They want to be in your sphere. Where do they go?
Yeah, they would. The best way to get a hold of me is just by email. So you can just email me directly. It's david@sevenbridgesrei.com, and that's spelled out. So sevenbridgesrei.com.
Love it, mate. Well, look, I want to thank you so much for dropping by. I just want to reflect some of the things that I took away from today's show. I think the thing I said earlier, that your lessons learned with even in the corporate world, that everyone wants to try and take the shortcut, but really the ability to roll up the sleeves and get the work done through experiences of grafting for your dollar in the beginning of your life as a young kid has helped you know that there are no shortcuts, right? Building businesses, it's not complicating, but it is tough and it takes time. And that's really what I think it sounds like you've learned along the way in order to build business ecosystems to then really realize the power of having a business to support the individual businesses within the bigger scheme to help you buy more and more real estate. And I think for me, that was probably the biggest thing that I took away from today. And also looking at like simplifying your business, always continuing to look to simplify, always continuing to look to learn and grow and figure out different systems. And it goes back to just rolling up the sleeves and getting it done because it is your baby, you love it, it's yours, and you're trying to build something from nothing. Did I leave anything out?
Absolutely. No, that sounds good, man.
Awesome, man. Well, look, again, thank you so much for dropping by. Enjoy the rest of your week and we'll catch up very, very soon.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
Well, there you have it. Another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible advice from David. Please do go check him out, and David at 7bridgesrei.com. His email will be up on our show notes after the show, so please get over to reedgoosens.com and check those out. I want to thank you all again for taking some time out of your day to tune in to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. And if you love this show, the easiest way to give back is to go on iTunes and give our show a 5-star review. It's pretty easy. It only takes you 2 minutes. Again, we're going to do this all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.